Okay, so in the last class, I remember we started Stoicism. We discussed what it essentially means. We don't need to go into great detail because Stoicism in itself is not what we are studying here. Because for us to truly understand, you have to study each philosopher, each Stoic philosopher as much as possible. But then some of them and their work also had to do a lot with the idea of natural law, how it evolved over a period of time, especially how it departed from, you know, Greek understanding of natural law, especially how it departed from, Greek glorification of laws of the city-state, laws of the police. In that sense, it is a very important development. Okay, so in the previous class, we discussed that. Zeno of Citium was the person who laid the foundation of this new way of thinking, this new philosophy called Stoicism. Now, Stoicism is a philosophy that talks about essentially, what do you call it? Some sort of temperance, okay, some sort of, um, balance between extremes, okay. And so this is something that we had already discussed, okay. So part of it is also related to Socratic virtues, okay, but then in other ways it's not Socratic, Aristotelian virtues, but in other ways it's also different, okay. So we are not going back to the same discussion again. It's just that it's a philosophy. Stoicism is a philosophy that had greatly transformed nature law school. Okay, so Stoicism, we discussed that it's essentially about maintaining calmness in reason, calmness in decision making, not getting to extremes. Okay, so we quite often say maintain stoic calm, so you know what it essentially means. Okay. Anyway, some of the extremes have already been discussed, but I don't think those are that important because those who are like completely detached, okay, the kind of detachment that Stoics talk about, if you take it to extremes, then you get some of the examples which were provided in the sense that Chrysippus saw no reason to abstain from incest and cannibalism because um, they would focus on the essence of this idea of morality. Everything else is not that important. Okay, it's basically emerges from our detachment, from our attachment to things, from our jealousy and all that. So you have to give it up. If you give that up, then all these are not really problem. Although he probably misunderstood the utility of incest. Cannibalism is a discussion that's worth having, but we can't have it here. Anyway, so those are some of the extremes in Stoicism. But then that's not what we are focused on here. Okay, Stoicism's more important contributions were that, unlike the Greek natural law that glorified laws of the city-state and the kind of discrimination that it did to outsiders, to foreigners, to women, to minors, etc., etc. Okay, were not problematic for them. Okay, but this Stoic universalism, this new Stoic universalism, okay, that talks about in Geno's work, a reason, when it's not corrupted by passion. Okay, that's the idea of natural law that they're talking about. Okay, so these are universal. Okay, anyone who's capable of reasoning without passion, okay, would come close to natural law. Now this is something that they say is in the possession of every human being, so not just the citizens of Rome but also anyone. Okay, so yes, the same idea also could be seen later on in Saint Paul's, saying that that these laws can also be found in the heart of Gentiles, okay, not just Jews. So that's essentially the idea. You are able to see people for who they are. Okay, they are humans. Okay, not just citizens or outsiders. Okay, they're also humans at the same time. So natural law would be applicable not just to the members of the city states, okay, not just the members of the republics, but also to outsiders. Not just I mean, as Roman Republic became emperor, more people from outside started coming in. There were more transactions, more interactions. So this is a law which is not just restricted to the citizens but also to outsiders. Okay, so that's the transition that we see. So most of these thinkers, okay, most of these Stoic thinkers were critical of this practice of, many of them, not all of them, many of them were critical of this practice of slavery. So Epictetus had criticized slavery, and Seneca, more importantly, had specifically said that citizens and slaves were blood relations equal under the natural law. So this the new idea of universalism is quite transformative, unlike the Greeks, who were, although talking in terms of universalism, were not really actually practicing that. So that's the transition that you see. So apart from this, there were other great Stoics. One of the most important one that you guys probably already have heard of is Marcus Tullius Cicero, okay, and the other one who came later is the last of the five great emperors, Marcus Aurelius. So who I referred to in the other day. Okay, so Marcus Aurelius's work, Meditation, is a famous work, very important work on Stoicism that you guys can study. Here, Marcus Tullius Cicero, he had contributed in terms of jurisprudence, okay, in terms of contribution of natural law to the idea of law, okay, in his very important book by the name De Republica, okay. So here written as On the Republic, okay, so that's the book we are referring to. He's a very important thinker, okay, he's a very important Stoic thinker in the sense that he was talking about universality, okay, in natural law. So that's a transition that you see in how they were thinking, okay. So essentially what they were saying is that God, humans, and this universe are on the same plane, okay. They are not completely separated, they are not different, okay. So remember this, because next we are going to take up a theological thinker who would have something different to say, okay, unlike what Cicero is talking about. He's saying that God, okay, humans and other existences are on the same plane, okay. In what sense? Is that reason participates in both God and us, okay, but God is more perfect, so God is most perfectly reasonable, okay. But that doesn't mean that we are not reasonable. We are humans, okay. We are just below God in that order, but we are also capable of reasoning. But then what distinguishes between us and animals is that animals do not possess the capacity of reason. Now, whether you subscribe to this or not is a different thing altogether. One can do scientific study, but for his time when he was writing about this is the kind of conclusion that they arrived at, okay. So one important aspect of humans, okay, that shows that we are above other creatures, as he identified, was our capacity of speech. For example, this discourse that we are having, I'm talking about something, you guys are raising questions. This is something that is very peculiar to humans. You might see other animals also developing their own quite complicated way of communicating that science has only now started understanding. But then even then that the degree of complexity in the kind of reasoning, the kind of speech that humans are capable of, so far we have not seen in other creatures. But then one may say, even applying Ciceronian thinking, that probably to a certain extent in higher apes, okay, maybe they are also capable of reasoning to a certain extent. But then he stands true to the extent that they are still lower in that order. But humans' capacity of reasoning and speech, okay, that's what makes them stand apart from everything else. But then above us is God, okay. But he's saying that God and humans do not exist on separate plane, and this capacity of reasoning and speech belongs in all human. Doesn't matter where they are from, okay, whether from Rome or from Athens, doesn't matter, okay. Um, it's the same everywhere. So that's the idea of universalism that he had come up with all these many years ago. Okay, so now Cicero is also the guy who you guys probably know, had protested against Julius Caesar's attempt at turning republic in the Roman republics into the empire. Okay, although he failed, but his specific opposition with Marcus Antonius. Anyway, why is that important? Because he had also he believed in upholding law over that of personal dictates. Okay, and that's the transition that you see, happening from Roman republics into when it transformed into an empire. Okay, during the republics, they had quite a bit of a constitutional sort of governance, but under the empire, those were essentially all about what the Caesar um, would say, the emperor would say. So that's something that he had, protested. Now, why did he protest? Because he believed, here's again the idea of rule of law that you see. Okay, although not arbitrary law, but that higher law. Okay, that should prevail over that of anything else. Okay, so that's the idea that he was trying to champion. Okay, a higher law that will not be subject to arbitrary dictates of you and I. Okay, so those are the kind of ideas that he was talking about. Now, what is this natural law all about? He said that natural law is, or law in the proper sense, okay, is right reason in harmony with nature. Okay, so remember what Zeno had said. Okay, how do you get natural law? When you apply reason without passion. Okay, for this fellow, more or less the same kind of thinking. He says that what so these are the law, okay, uh, in proper sense, okay, these are the proper laws, okay. So proper laws are the ones which are reasonable, which are in accordance with reason, okay. So law in the proper sense is right reason, not every other reason, but right reason in harmony with nature, okay. Why does he emphasize on nature? Because this is again, remember, natural law. He says that if you observe the world, okay, you will find that they have a certain function. Everything has a certain function to play. Again, kind of teleological, in their approach, as you see. Certain function to play. Everything has certain purpose. So do humans. Humans also have certain nature. Of course, it is prone to corruption. It's not saying that humans are incapable of deviating from their nature, but if you generally observe the humanity, you will see that there is an essential purpose for which he exists. There is a certain nature that they possess, and if you observe that, then if you apply your reason, then you come to conclusion about what is the right law. So that's what he's saying. The law in the proper sense is the right reason in harmony with nature. Okay, so that's essentially the idea. Something that doesn't transform from, and universality is that it's something that does not transform from here to there or from time to time. So space time does not affect it. Okay, so even in the absence of all those factors, the universality of law will remain. So as you observe the nature, it only gives you clues to what those higher laws are. So here's a very big para which has been provided. If you guys see this in the reading that I had shared, it says this in De Republica, or in English, on the Republic. He said, true law is right reason in agreement with nature. Okay, it is of universal application, unchanging and everlasting. Okay, it applies everywhere, never changes, everlasting. It summons to duty by its commands, okay, and averts from wrongdoing by its prohibition. So it could either ask you to do something or ask you to abstain from doing something. And it does not lay its commands and prohibitions on good men in vain, okay? uh, though neither have any effect on the wicked, okay? So this sentence, just keep in mind, I'm going to differentiate this from other laws of nature. Okay, so it says that it does not lay its command and prohibitions on good men in vain. What he's saying is that good men will automatically follow it, but for the others, you have to follow it deliberately, and good people will know because they will already be applying right reason in agreement with nature. Okay, but though neither have any effect on the wicked, he's saying that on the wicked, okay, it will have no effect. Okay. Now this raises many problems though. Whether wickeds are by nature incapable of reasoning, if that's the case, what's their fault? All those questions do arise. Okay. Then he subsequently says it is a sin to try to alter this law, nor is it allowable to attempt to repeal any part of it, and it is impossible to abolish it entirely. We cannot be freed from its obligations by Senate or people, and we need to look outside ourselves for an expounder or interpreter of it. So see what they are talking about. Roman Republic, so it was a constitutional republic. So certain, guaranteed rights. Okay, we understand them rights as now, but certain, rights could not be taken even by the Senate. You are human. You are entitled to some sort of respect. Okay, that you will not be subject to violence. That promises made to you are to be kept. Okay, all those things will be respected because you are human. Okay, so a senate will not be, or laws of the people will not be able to take that away. Forget about what the Caesar says and does. Okay, so, and we need not look outside ourselves for an expounder or interpreter of it, and there will not be different laws in Rome and at Athens, or different law now or in the future, but one eternal and unchangeable law will be valid for all nations and all times, and there will be one master and ruler, that is God, over us all, for he is the author of this law, its promulgator, and its enforcing judge. Whosoever is disobedient is fleeing from himself and denying his human nature, and by reason of this very fact he will suffer worst penalties, even if he escapes what is commonly called punishment. So you see, the law that he is referring to is not ordinary man-made law. He's talking about higher law, that even if you escape to manage to escape from the grip of the law, there will be consequences waiting for you. I don't know if he's referring to afterlife, but in terms of how you deviate from what is your essence, that is your human nature, but probably also in the afterlife. So for that I need to look into the kind of religious beliefs that they had, of which I have no knowledge as of yet. So yes, but then he's talking about some kind of consequences will be there, although you may escape the grip of punishment, as we understand. Okay, so that's the idea of natural law that they are talking about. Now, the kind of God that he is referring to, why am I insisting on that? In the sense that Cicero was not like an ordinary hardcore believer of religious believer, and he didn't take religion as seriously as any hardcore believer would. But then he was nonetheless a kind of believer, in the sense that most of the Stoics that we are talking about, they were pantheistic. Okay, now what pantheism is all about. It's basically, if you can imagine God, then what is that then? Okay, is it a separate entity existing separate from the existence that is the universe itself, or should we call the universe itself as God? So pantheistics would say that there is no separate entity, but the universe in itself is that thing called God. Okay. Now, because we are part of that same universe, so we participate in that, godliness of God to a certain extent. Okay, so that's why he's saying that everyone is equal. So these ideas, although I don't know how seriously you guys are able to take, okay, depends on what ideas you believe in, but then these are profound for the time, in the sense that in those times, okay, these guys were talking about universality of human beings. Okay, not just today, 2200 years ago. Okay, they were talking about this idea. Okay, then religion took over, and then you see what had happened in Europe. So these are very important developments. Okay, so and this is the contribution of Stoicism, and more specifically of Cicero. However, one thing that you guys should also know at the same time, that although he was talking about universalism, did he completely give up slavery as was in practice? No, didn't, because he also owned a slave, but then he definitely argued in favor of good treatment to the slaves. But then those were different times, as you know. Even the New Testament is not able to completely proscribe slavery. So so many other factors do in fact affect us in our personal life. But then the idea, the philosophy that he's talking about is definitely worth um, uh, um, uh, praising. So that's very important. So that's the idea of natural law that he talks about. Okay, so then certain specific elements of natural law is identified, that natural law reflects cosmic order of nature. Okay, not man-made. So the same idea that we see here as was in practice. Okay, you do not need, unlike Plato, who talked about philosopher, king, etc., he says that you do not need wise men. Okay, so reason is not just private property of smart men. No, it's accessible to all, because the moment you grade, then the discrimination arises. So he's saying that it's not just in the hold of wise men. It's everyone who's able to reason. Okay, natural law will be revealed to that person. Okay, and of course natural law is moral law. So this is above ordinary legislation, to the extent that ordinary legislation are not in agreement with natural law. That means not in agreement with reason. To that extent, that law is corrupted. Okay, and of course this law is not just binding on the subjects, but also on the rulers. So everyone is under the rule of this law. And lastly, those who commit them pay heavy price, moral price, in forms of debasement of their own human nature. So as I said earlier, from the quote, that you may escape punishment, okay, here, but then there is a serious deviation from what is your essence, that is your human nature. So this kind of ideas are even without conscious knowledge of it, we say things like that. Someone who commits some heinous crime, you say that what a inhuman person he or she is. When we say that, we are saying that there is an essential human nature, and that tells us what is right and wrong. If you apply reason in the absence of your passion, then you come to know of it, and that's the supreme law. All laws have to be in agreement, or at least, okay, not against it. Okay, so that's the idea of natural law that the Stoic thinkers, and more specifically Cicero here, was talking about. So yes, divinity is now not just restricted to God. A bit of divinity is now in everyone, and that's why everyone is to be respected. Everyone is divine to a certain extent. Okay, so it doesn't matter what your skin color is, whether you are foreigner, or whether you are a peregrine, or you are a citizen. Doesn't matter what your sex is. Okay. Um, uh, you will be treated equally. So that's the kind of idea that they were talking about. Now that's the natural law. So you know how it is different from the Greek way of thinking. Okay. Now I also told you that this Stoic approach of natural law had profound effect on how how laws during the Roman period. Okay, starting from the republics until the it became empire, and until even in the 6th century AD, okay, when Justinian one had codified the Roman law. Okay, until then these ideas had a good effect on how Roman law transformed. Okay, so that's something worth looking into. So we can't go into great detail, but I'll just lay down the different kinds of laws that existed. So some terminologies that you guys need to know. Okay, so three terms that you guys need to know is, the first is yes naturally. Okay, so yes naturally is nothing but the natural law that we were talking about. Right reason, okay, right reason in agreement with nature. Okay, that's natural law that is revealed to you, not just to the philosophers, but to everyone, doesn't matter who. If you apply your reason, okay, to the nature of things, okay, if you observe, so for example, causality is visible to you, that if I do this, the effect will be that, then you can remember what had happened earlier. So all these factors, okay, all these things, okay, reason participates in all this and reveals the natural law to you. So yes, the first kind of law that I just referred to, the first term that you need to remember during this Romanistic period is yes naturally. Okay, then there is another kind of law known as ius gentium. Okay, ius gentium. Okay, now what is ius gentium? If the term would be law of nations. Okay, so what is that? Ius gentium was essentially the laws which were applicable when the parties concerned were, for example, people from different places. They are not the citizens of the republic, okay, but they are from elsewhere. Okay, so they are foreigners. Okay, so in their dealings, some laws have to be applied. Okay, those laws earlier, okay, were known as ius gentium, but then it changed over a period of time. Okay, so that's why we call it ius gentium. Now, in modern sense of the term, okay, law of nations could mean two different things. Okay, so law of nations, also known as conflict of law, as we understand, would be the private law. Okay, private law. But then international law, okay, which is law of nation public, okay, that is laws between states. Okay, so so understand this distinction. But when we are talking about, then we didn't have this clear distinction as we have today. Although I'm not saying that treaties didn't exist, treaties did exist, okay, which were probably based on certain other ideas of law. But anyway, so that's the idea of ius gentium, okay, law of the nations, that will basically affect non-citizens. Okay, so people from different places coming and interacting, the law that will be, or people from elsewhere and one of the citizens. Okay, so that's the ius gentium. And there was a third kind of law, and that's known as ius civile. Okay, ius civile. Ius civile is basically the law that is applicable to the citizens. Okay, this is a law that became applicable to the citizens. Now, for the long history that this Roman Republic emerged, until the 3rd century BCE, so ius civile is what existed. Okay, it was very formal in nature, just the way we made distinction between common law and equity earlier. Okay, in a similar way, so ius civile was basically very formalistic. Okay, and would be restricted in its application only to the citizens. Now, ius gentium, as we discussed, will be applicable to foreigners, but also between foreigners and citizens. Okay, there are many reasons why that was the case. As I told you, ius civile was very formalistic, very what should I say, procedural, and had lots of nitty-gritties. Not everyone liked those formal elements of the law. So for outsiders, they would rather prefer ius gentium over that of ius civile. And ius naturally, you guys know what that is. Okay. Now there is another categorization of law that was made. Okay. During those time. Okay. One was the ius scripta, and the other one was ius non-scripta. Okay, so ius non-scripta is essentially the customary laws which were applicable to the Romans. Okay, so it's part of the ius civile. Okay, but then there were also ius non-scripta. Okay, So what are those? So yes, non-script. Then you had yes scripta. So yes, non-scripta are essentially the common, customary laws, which are also part of the civil law. Okay, yes civile. Apart from that, there were also yes scripta, which were basically written laws. But do not confuse yes scripta only with statutory laws. Okay, any law which is written in form could be considered as yes scripta. So what are those? So those could be statutes or laws enacted either by the proclamation of the Senate or by the popular assemblies. Okay, so that's one of them. Then they had praetorial or magisterial edicts. Okay, so basically when a praetor or a magistrate takes charge, okay, they basically lay down what the law will be and how the law will be applied, and sometimes they also clarify the status of existing laws. Okay, so those proclamations, those are the edicts which were also sources of law. Okay, and then you had another, there are many kinds of law. We are essentially talking about a few. Okay, there are certain laws. Okay, subsequently when the empire was set up, okay, the emperor could also issue certain kind of laws. Okay, so that's another source of law. But until that happened, okay, these laws were there. And apart from this, there were certain jurists. Okay, certain jurists who could also explain the law and also clarify you know the status of existing laws. Okay, and they are known as responsa prudentium. So basically some jurists giving their opinions about the about what the law is. So these are many different other specific sources of law. Now, as you guys know, yes civil and yes gentium are clearly different. Okay, yes civil will be applicable to citizens. Yes gentium will be, as it says, laws of the nations. But it doesn't mean international law as we understand, but laws as applicable to citizens between two different nations. Okay, so yes gentium was applicable to that. Okay, now where did yes gentium come from? Yes gentium emerged from the decisions of this magisterial or praetorial decisions, because there was no clear laid down law, but every time a matter that would emerge and come before one of these praetors or magistrates, okay, they will decide the matter, and as they lay down the matter, yes gentium will emerge. Okay, now the question that remains is whether yes naturally and yes gentium are the same thing. We will not say the same about it in its earlier forms, but later on, probably, in the sense that as you know your, what do you call it, as the Roman Republic became an empire, so more and more people from different nations came together, and more interactions started happening. So for example, in the Mediterranean, lots of trades would happen, so mercantile laws would emerge. Okay, and those laws have to be uniform. Okay, if trade etc is to happen, those laws have to happen. Okay, and those laws cannot be discriminatory. So those laws would require that you treat an outsider and a citizen more or less approximately equally. So those ideas of natural law that we talked about, which were universal, made their way one way or the other through the interpretation given by these magistrates or through responsa prudentium into the Ius Gentium. So later on you could say that yes, natural law, yes, naturally greatly affected Ius Gentium. And so was the case with Ius Civile, because this law has to be made more and more uniform, and Ius Civile basically started taking the same form as Ius Gentium has been. So because the same law is now being made to almost everyone, so even in their application through these different interpretations, they ultimately these ideas of universalism that you see in Ius naturally made its way into the civile as well. So this is the effect of civile, naturally on both what do you call it, gentium, as well as indirectly, not directly, indirectly on natural civil. Now this is how this whole thing played out. Okay, subsequently, um, most of these powers of lawmaking, okay, as the empire came into existence, these powers of lawmaking through plebiscite, okay, or say senatorial proclamations were basically taken away. So they now had to reflect essentially what the emperor believed in. Okay, however, still, some of the these emperors were still great rulers. Okay, anyway, ruling then must have been much simpler than how what ruling means today. So those ideas will no longer be prevalent, and no emperor could alone, okay, without an entire system, out there, be able to rule, nor would that be justified in today's time. Anyway, that's the change that had happened back then. But then that in whatever way natural, the Roman law had evolved, okay, in its different forms, okay, was greatly affected by this idea of universality that you see in uh, natural law. And these were subsequently, as codified. Okay, the codification had happened earlier as well in the form of 12 tables. Okay, basically to ensure that those laws are not changed as against the plebeians by the patricians. Okay, now, subsequently, Justinian, as we had already discussed, had codified the law, and it is that law that we today, glorify as that great natural law. Subsequently, those laws were great Roman law. Now, subsequently, those Roman laws were also adopted in, continental Europe, essentially in Germany, as we discussed in the previous semester. But then, after 1900, all those laws changed, to a great extent. But until then, Roman law had such a great effect everywhere. In fact, most of the civilian systems follow the same idea of Roman law. Now, this idea of Roman law was greatly influenced by this idea of natural law, which had come from those Stoic philosophy. Now, that's the status of natural law so far. After this, what happens, as you know, Christianity, starts spreading, and many, thinkers from Christian perspective started giving their own, interpretation and understanding of what is natural law. So, one of the transitions that you definitely see is that, unlike that formless God that these thinkers were talking about, okay, they now have a God who's out there, Yahweh essentially, and who actively participates in the affairs of the universe. Not just that the order, if the order is, somehow broken, it automatically takes its course, but no, now you have a God who's observing what you are doing, okay, it's conscious of what you are doing, it has commanded you to do something and to abstain from doing something. If you break the law, then God will punish you, either this life or that life. Okay, so that's the kind of transition that you see now among the scholastics. The source of this natural law is God. Okay, so that's what we are going to discuss tomorrow when we discuss about Saint Augustine. First we discuss about Saint Augustine, and then we go to Thomas Aquinas. So that should take us 3 days, and then we can go take up one contract. No, we'll take up Victor Hugo Grotius's secular approach to natural law, then one contractarian, that would be John Locke, and then we can proceed to John Finnis, and that would be natural law for you. So yes, that's it for today. So if you guys have any confusion, clarification that you need, so feel free to ask me question now.